Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Chris Krebs, Director of the U.S. Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency at the Department of Homeland Security. Thanks for joining us. At least if you're in the lower 48, good afternoon. If you're with us from Hawaii, I wish I was you. So what we're going to talk about today, particularly in the midst of the COVID response, is the essential worker. That I think has been on the top of mind for every state or local executive, but also the American economy and the businesses and industries that support. Got a great panel for you today. We've got Tom Kuhn from the Edison Electric Institute, Chris Roberti from the Chamber of Commerce, Leslie Sarasin from FMI, the food industry, and Bill Sullivan from American Trucking Association. So you should hopefully have materials that give you a little bit more background, and rather than waste time on individual intros, I was figuring we could just get right into it. We only got 30 minutes or so, and you're not here to listen to me talk. You want to hear our partners and our panelists. So I think what we will do is start with kind of an over-the-top question. Want to start with a general question to I think I'll start Chris Roberti with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, kind of that over-the-top question. This was a pretty significant event. The first 50-state national disaster. Everyone here is used to a hurricane or wildfire or some other sorts of localized or regional at best sort of activity. 50 states, big time event. So from the Chamber's perspective and the kind of roll up of all your members, what was it that was so fundamentally different? What were the challenges that your members experienced in just keeping things running?
Well, that's a good question. And I think you hit on it sort of in your question, which is, this was a disaster that occurred at 50 states or in 50 states all at the same time. And so what we had was a differing views from some of the states on how the governors and state and local officials were going to deal with the COVID epidemic and the pandemic. We had issues where companies were trying to figure out what they should be doing or how they should be doing it or what they could do and couldn't do. And so the challenge was sort of front and center, I think, and maybe we can get into this later, but what was important was how everybody reacted. And from our perspective, we found that the relationships that we had built, both individually with the federal government agencies like yours and others, relationships with our individual company members and with our associations that are members, with state and local chambers, and with state and local authorities, was one of the ways that we were able to start coalescing, coming together, and working together to come up with some ideas and ways to deal with the epidemic. And so the challenge was exactly as you outlined, was 50 disasters all at the same time, and the sort of the next step was, how do we start to deal with this? And we did it through relationships, and I'll stop there and let some of the others weigh in.
So I think that's a good framing. The other panelists we have, Leslie with FMI, the food industry, Bill Sullivan with American Trucking, Tom Kuhn with EEI. It's a really good distillation of one of the more critical issues, right? If there's not food being manufactured or being produced, people aren't eating. If the electricity is not there to help support the plants, we're not eating. If the trucks aren't there to get the food to the markets, we're not eating. So I think we've got an opportunity here to talk a little bit about some of the things that we experienced. And let me start, Leslie, if you don't mind, with sure. You. What were some of the hiccups you think that we experienced? I think in the food packaging or production side was a particularly hard hit subsector, at least. What were some of the surprises that your members saw?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that I think we spent the most amount of time early on in the process doing with our companies and on behalf of our members was trying to calm customers. There was so much anxiety among our customer base as to whether or not there was going to be enough food, and would the stores stay open? Would the government continue to identify grocery as an essential part of the economy? So there was all of this anxiety that we spent a tremendous amount of time and energy trying to help our companies quell, so that we wouldn't continue with the panic buying, which we started with at first. And so that really put us in the position of doing our best to try to reassure the consuming population all over the country that there indeed is enough supply of food in the system. And while all of our customers might not be able to find exactly what they were looking for at exactly the moment they were looking for it, if everyone would just be calm and be very focused and thoughtful in how they're doing their shopping and really trying to purchase for what they need for the next week or so rather than what they might want 6 months from now. It really became an issue for us in trying to help people understand the supply chain. And what has been most surprising to me, I think, about this entire process is for those of us who work in the industry, the supply chain is a critical part of what we do, and it's a very adaptive, a very resilient supply chain, which I think we've proven over the course of the last few months. But most of the world had no idea how food got to grocery stores, or how it was produced, or how it was packaged. They just really didn't think about it very much. And now what I think is so marvelous about this is how we all have a much better understanding of what goes on in the food supply chain. The issues related to the supply chain are being discussed by people who 6 months ago would have never given another thought to what happens in a supply chain. So I think that's been both surprising and gratifying to us as we've gone through this process.
So I think that's a great transition over to Bill. You are the logistics piece of the supply chain. And truckers are how the vast majority of American products are distributed across this great country. So can you kind of play on Leslie's opening observations a little bit and tell us, what did you see that was from your members that was such the challenges, the surprises even, and then how did you get through it in those first few months?
You bet, Chris, and a lot of similarities with what Leslie experienced. Listening to her, the last point she raises is one of the first that we found, and that was that people take for granted how their stuff gets to them, and whether that's food or medicine or deliveries. So, the appreciation for a supply chain, as simplistic as that sounds, was a big part of it. The challenges we faced, much like the other people on the panel, were how to operate in a 50-state environment and the various different roles, of the federal government, the state governments, municipal governments, individual companies, other industry partners and sectors. So for us, in the beginning, it was public health decisions that local authorities were making to slow the spread of the virus, without thought of how goods and food and services and groceries were going to make it into their communities. And I remember the 6-county area of the Bay Area in San Francisco that started early with a quarantine, but every one of our members, and a number of them delivered to San Francisco, raised that as a real fear. Their drivers were concerned. From an industry association standpoint, the partnerships, as much as that's a cliche for us to talk about, the partnerships we had with you, especially at CISA, and getting essential workers covered and getting the word out to the governors and the mayors that if you want groceries on the shelf and medicine in the hospitals, you need to address this issue first and not at the end. Eventually trucks are going to get in there, but if you screw it up on the front end, it's going to be a problem. So the takeaway to me at the end of this was, the first time this has happened in my lifetime, and I'm reasonably old, not quite as old as Chris, it appears, but but how we all pulled together, like I read in the newspaper and watch television, and all I see is how divisive, and it's fights and fights, and we watched DHS, the White House, Congress, mayors, governors, everybody just trying to figure it out. And for a legislative geek like me, at least my background, Congress passed 3 massive pieces of legislation virtually unanimously. And when does that happen, right? And here you have, the Donald Trump administration working with Gavin Newsom in California, and the mayors of these counties. So the ability of people to rise to the occasion in this federal system, and the vital importance to me of what national associations, national industry groups can do to keep what's going on with meatpacking plants in South Dakota connected to what's going on in California. It was all of that coordination and just human effort, give a hoot, and figuring out how to be an American and not an American. So it worked because of the people involved, and everybody just rolled up their sleeves and got it done.
Yeah, I think I kind of bringing it that theme into the overarching theme of this keynote panel, the essential worker. One of the things that we found so interesting is, particularly here in the United States, I think we tend to overdo things a little bit. On the critical infrastructure space, we got 16 sectors. If you go to Europe, the average European country, and even the EU in and of themselves, well, they have 6 or 7 critical national infrastructures sectors identified. We did it in a way that was overexpansive, so we understood our underlying infrastructure that much more. And so when those, you mentioned Governor Newsom, or we have Governor Baker in Massachusetts, and they announced their stay-at-home or shelter-in-place orders. When we got a sense of those things coming, we were able to pull together that essential critical infrastructure workers list in about 36 hours, which, you talk about speed, you talk about universal adoption. I was amazed that we were able to do that so quickly, that the feedback we got was generally across the board positive, or constructive at the least. And to say that of the 42 states that issued some kind of stay-at-home order, 35 used the CISA guidance, the Essential Critical Infrastructure Workers Guidance. So I think, to me, that's a big takeaway along the lines, Bill, that you just mentioned. So Tom, I want to bring it over to you. So your industry, obviously, hey, if the lights aren't on, we're all having a bad day. So take us through those first few months, and how did the electricity subsector come together? Lots of experience, obviously, with hurricanes over the last couple of years. How did the subsector rise to the occasion?
Well, Chris, I really first want to start by thanking you. You've been a tremendous leader throughout this situation, and to Chris Roberti, the chamber brings us together regularly, and so we have a situation where we work with each other on cyber issues and other kinds of things of that nature. And I think those things are huge in the beginning. We were fortunate enough to have you speak to our board of directors, our last in-person meeting right before we all went into quarantine. And we set up regular calls of our Electric Sector Coordinating Council, CEO level organization. We had regular board calls. You were on many of them. This council was set up as a public-private partnership, and I'm a huge believer in public-private partnerships because it is necessary when you have natural disasters or cyber attacks or whatever. And so we were used to moving 40, 50, 60,000 people around the country and from Canada, et cetera, to deal with major disasters. We were used to dealing with things like Puerto Rico, where you had logistic challenges to get across the water. And you've been working on us with those things for years, in addition to the cyber issue. The pandemic was different, as everybody said here. It was a 50-state issue. It was all our member companies, and we had to organize it in a way that very, very quickly we had the mechanism with that council, and we got into the calls. We had each company establish particular points of contact, and we identified the issues. So one of obviously the top issues was the essential worker issue. When in a quarantine, can you get those line workers and nuclear power plant operators and transmission control center people to their jobs, and make sure that the lights get on for all those other sectors, and customers who are living at home can deal with that. So we did that. You were incredible with that guidance for the critical infrastructure essential workers, which was allowed us to do those things. And the Secretary of Energy got that guidance out to governors and mayors too. Besides, so we had a multi-pronged effort on that. We had multiple issues like testing and PPEs and things of that nature. We worked through each and every one of them. And again, I would echo what everybody said here. You've got these are things that you have to be prepared for. We didn't have a resource guide on a pandemic, but we established one with each and every call, each and every issue that came up, and we've been through 9 versions of it right now. So, and it's still getting bigger.
Yeah. Well, one of those things that, let me put it this way. So, Leslie, when I think about the various grocery stores, I've never seen so much plexiglass or Lexan go up so quickly around some of the checkout kiosks or points of sale. Talk to me a little bit, if you can, about some of the challenges you had, particularly on the PPE front. I know, Tom, I worked with your members for months and months and months on PPE. Seems that the stock has opened up a little bit on face coverings, and what were your concerns? How'd you get through them, and how are you looking at whether it's increasing hotspots or maybe a second wave coming forward? What's your plan for round 2?
Well, we did have a lot of challenges with PPE at first. There are certain parts of the food industry where PPE is just a normal part of the outfit every day at work. But there were an awful lot of parts of the food industry, particularly those in the grocery store level, where PPE was not part of the routine. So when you referenced a few minutes ago the plexiglass, that was something that stores could do quickly, and they did it, and they've put their cashiers into plexiglass boxes, so to speak, to be able to protect them and the customers as they went through the checkout lines. But when the day came that it became clear that masks and gloves and other types of protective equipment were important and necessary in this pandemic for those of our workers who are on the front lines, we of course did face challenges with getting access to PPE. We created at FMI a resource, an online resource bank, so that every time we heard of a company that had access to some of those materials, we threw it onto this electronic resource guide, and our companies could access the information, place the orders they needed as they needed it, et cetera. And in many occasions, they were able to actually access it that way. We did reach a point, however, once we thought all along, of course, that healthcare workers should have priority for those types of protective equipment. But after healthcare workers, we felt like we were pretty high up the list as to who should receive access to them. And so we were able to work closely with government partners. We worked closely with the White House Task Force, with our colleagues at FDA and CDC, to learn more about where there were opportunities to have access to PPE. And we even went through a process at one point where USDA came to us and said, if you will give us information about who your companies are, we will work with them to send them face masks so that their workers can have them. And so we were able to get a lot done through that process, but it took all of those partnerships, and as the others have said, the relationships that we've created over decades with various agencies, including yours.
Yeah. So Bill, let me shift over to you real quick. So you have I think a different problem that many of your members and the employees may not be operating from their home base. They could be scattered across the country in jurisdictions or states where there may be some challenges on testing or sourcing or even delivery. How do you hit somebody when they're in the middle of an I-10 run? So can you talk to us a little bit about those experiences?
You bet. And it was, the representing the logistics industry, a number of our members, their customers were people shipping PPE and hand sanitizer and others. So there was a lot of partnering up within the industry early on, and really big members, also members of the chamber and others, UPS, FedEx, others who would put out hand sanitizer refills at terminals. We were working with the truck stops, commercial truck stops through their industry association and their members that are also participating with us. But you're exactly right, and the worry of drivers and companies that men and women would be on the road, particularly over the road long haul drivers, would be going halfway across the country or all the way across the country, only to return home and be concerned about the potential for infecting family members. And so access to testing was a challenge early on, just as all of the testing resources were coming online. Your partners, your friends at FEMA worked a lot with us, as did DOT. Secretary Chow and FMCSA, the acting administrator, Jim Mullen, were both fabulous at coordinating with DHS, the White House, and us, the Coronavirus Task Force. So, we as an association went out and bought a few 100,000 masks, maybe 500,000 masks. FEMA, through DOT and with our help and independent driver help, also distributed more than 1 million masks at truck stops, rest stops, a handful of companies who then further distributed them. So being in the supply chain logistics business afforded our companies an ability to know where those partnerships were and work with us and just connect everybody up. But the mobile nature of the industry presented challenges that really was just, again, human beings getting together and figuring out how to get those products out there. And we had companies, one of whom came to the White House for a sort of Thank God for Truckers event, which of course we loved, but the president put together. But one of the guys one of the drivers who was there, picks up and delivers from Jack Daniels, and they were, off to the side making a fair amount of hand sanitizer, which then dropped into the trucking supply chain and a number of partners that we had. With one fascinating thing to me about trucking, having not spent my whole life in it, is, the vast majority, basically 90% of the industry is small business, and more than 70% of our members are 20 trucks or fewer, and there are an awful lot of independent operators, one-man, two-man trucking companies. So, a massive trucking company like a Werner Trucking or a UPS has access to different things than Bill and Chris's trucking company. So we were serving as bridges and glues wherever we could. We worked with the Owner-Operator Independent Driver Association to try to square some of that up too, and they did a great job representing their people. But the mobile nature, the small business, and just the uncertainty that everybody faced was a challenge.
I think now I'm about 3.5 years into this job. The area that I think has come along the greatest in the last 3.5 years is supply chain risk management, really understanding where your potential pain points are. And I think in this event, there's no department of the supply chain. There's no department of the economy. Yes, there's a Department of Commerce, but I think we all came away with wanting to have a better understanding of where stuff is in commerce. And so, Chris, Roberti, to you, and I'm springing this one on you, so apologies, but and I think about events like this, I'm always compiling a real-time after-action report in my head. I'm thinking about what the next 2, 3, 4 months look like, particularly if there's a second wave. As we look into the fall and the winter, what are some of the things that we can do together as industry government partners to increase visibility, but probably more importantly, increase communications to get ahead of some of the misinformation that's out there?
Chris, thanks. That's a good question. It's sort of where my head was as well. I think, and as the previous, my other colleagues on this panel have talked about the great work that you and your team at CISA, your colleagues at FEMA have done, the flexibility that you and other government agencies were willing to show in helping to figure out what are essential workers, how do we add different groups that we may not have thought about at first, was a great demonstration of what Bill called, people being good people. In terms, the other thing I think I'll recall is, something that you had said on one of the then bi-weekly calls was about compiling daily after action reports. What are we learning? And then sort of a longer term after action report. What have we learned? I think what we need to do, and this is one of the things I was going to raise today, is, we need to sit down again, now that initial rush has passed and we're sort of thinking through the fall, and if we're going to see another surge and into the future, we need to sit down as associations, members, with our government partners, with you and others, to collate what have we learned, and then develop some procedures. What can we do better? Because I think we have a second shot at this, and I think we did a really good job learning on the fly and acting on the fly the first time, given the constraints that we had. But we can do better, and we should do better. And I think one of the things I did want to mention also is the way that the work that your team has done over the past three years, looking at critical infrastructure, looking at assets, functions, and people. And that, I think, allowed you to put out that guidance in 36 hours because you'd done the work. And that's something that when we were talking with some foreign governments who were struggling to try to figure out how they should look at setting forth essential workers or identifying or classifying them, we were talking about the work that you and Bob Klatsky over at the National Risk Management Center have done in doing this thinking ahead of time. So I'd say we need to sit down, soon this August. We need to, come up with our punch list of things that we looked at that worked well, that didn't work well. And then be ready to act in the fall and beyond. And the other thing I would say is that it also, this experience has really, convinced me, and I think a lot of us, on the need for a continuity of economy plan. And the Cyberspace Solarium Commission has done some initial thinking in that regard. But I think, we as a nation need to be able to respond when we have another major disaster, whether it's natural disaster, a pandemic, or a large-scale cyber attack.
Yeah, that PANX, the pandemic annex to the Cyber Solarium and the continuity of the economy requirement may have had something to do with that. But yeah, it really resonated with me. All right, real quick, parting shots, 30 seconds. Tom Kuhn, what's your takeaway from the last several months?
Well, I do be prepared, as Chris Roberti said. We've got to continue working on these things. The next thing may be a cyber attack. Lots of challenges. I'd like to give a shout out to one of our partners, the labor unions. They've been terrific, and the head of several labor unions and myself just got out a message to make sure that people on and off the job are wearing masks and doing social distancing. I think if we're not going to have another major surge here, we've got to get everybody to practice the CDC guidelines.
Got it. All right, Leslie, 30 seconds.
I couldn't be prouder of what our industry has been able to accomplish, and the industries of those represented here on this panel. I think our companies all rose to the occasion. Our frontline workers rose to the occasion, and we found ourselves rewriting playbooks as we went. So I think we'll continue to do that, and we'll be prepared to take care of whatever comes at us next. I want to echo Tom's comments about being prepared particularly in the context of protecting ourselves and protecting each other as we're out and about.
Got it. Thanks. All right, Bill, 30 seconds, then we're out.
You bet. I think it's really important that we do our job as industry associations to educate people about why things like supply chain or food supply or power grid matter. And so the awareness that we've seen rise up is great in the moment, but we're always fighting yesterday's battle and not as aware of what tomorrow's will be. But when we know the other players and the other partners, I think, and trust in government, we have to trust in government. When all that comes together, I think we always rise to the challenge, and this is a great example of it.
Got it. Thanks. Well, hey, look, this is why Congress created my agency, CISA, is to bring partners, industry and government together to find solutions to risk to critical infrastructure. It's been a real honor working with y'all over the last several months. Looking forward to the next several. Hopefully we'll get to the other end of this COVID thing sooner rather than later. The news out of Moderna yesterday is pretty encouraging. So in the meantime, wear a mask, wash your hands, stay socially distanced, and be safe. Thanks.
Thank you for your leadership, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Krebs, Bill, Chris, Leslie, and Tom for those insights and unpacking the challenges that we've seen throughout the supply chain and helping those frontline workers. So now we're going to move to today's final breakout sessions. Today's programming will conclude with these breakout sessions. However, we have one more day of timely event and engaging content and unique ways to collaborate. So we are very excited to be partnering with the Coca-Cola Company and the Disaster Action Alliance for tomorrow's programming, which will really center around the COVID-19 plus X, which Chris kind of alluded to a little bit in his remarks, but looking at the collaboration required to respond to additional hazards, natural disasters, while we're still responding to a global pandemic. The day will include a briefing from the White House Coronavirus Task Force, a behind-the-scenes look at the Johns Hopkins COVID-19 mask, as well as an Ask Me Anything with the FEMA Deputy Administrator. So make sure to get your questions ready for the queue, and he will be here to respond to all of those. So now we look forward to seeing you in the breakout sessions and also in the virtual networking lounge, and then seeing you back here tomorrow. Thanks again for being here today, and we hope you enjoy the next round of breakouts. Thank you.